the thing I want to know, the thing I'm fascinated about is like how sports evolve, how people evolve, and then how we as people inspire others to evolve sports. So, and I think Frisbee and disc golf is in a really cool spot right now where that evolution is starting to come out, and you clearly had a big part of it. So the first thing I want to know though is I want to go way back to wherever you grew up. I haven't even asked you where you grew up yet, but I would love for you to just paint a picture of what kid Ken Climo was like, what childhood was like, the good memories, the bad memories, whatever sensory memories you have, sight, smell, sound, taste, anything of where you grew up.
I grew up in Clearwater, Florida, right where I live nowadays. Born and raised there, lived there my whole life, besides all the traveling I've done throughout the world. Went to church as a child, Central Christian Church with my family, probably from very young to, I don't know, 13 or 14 before they kind of lost interest and stopped going as well. But it was a big part of my life back then. It was, you know, choir boy and stuff like that.
Did you like choir?
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. You know, I was younger, it was fine. I mean, and now not so much, but for sure. I liked the setting, you know, it was peaceful and uplifting, I guess you could say.
Clearwater right next to the beach. Were you always going to the beach, hanging out there? Was that kind of like part of your lifestyle growing up?
Yeah, I spent some ample time at the beach for sure. Used to ride my bike from my house, which is about 7 miles, down to the beach with some buddies of mine. We'd do that very often in the summertime.
How many buddies did you have? Did you have a gang that you kind of rolled around with?
Yeah, a lot of my neighborhood guys, you know, 4 or 5 of, you know, the normal kind of neighborhood gang, 4 or 5 guys, like Sandlot and stuff like that, you know, that kind of stuff. Jumping bicycles and making ramps over garbage cans and jumping bikes into lakes off of ramps and tying a rope to them so you can pull it back in, stuff like that. Just all sorts of really fun stuff like that. We did a lot of fishing. There was a couple ponds around my house with big lunker bass. The guy that owned the ponds would stock them, and there was just giant 10-pounders and stuff in there, and lots of shiners you could catch for bait. And as soon as you throw it in there, boom, you got one bobber go under. Just really, really good all-American childhood, I'd say.
If I was an elementary school teacher and I had you in my class, what kind of kid would I be getting in my classroom?
Not too mischievous, you know. Kept my head down and didn't get in a lot of trouble in school. Not too much at all.
Did you get good grades?
I did, you know, as much as I could. Probably a little less so the older I got, just enough to scrape by to graduate high school. Started getting interested in other, you know, other things when you get a little older. Things pull your attention away from that kind of stuff. But, you know, didn't have to go to another grade or flunk or anything. You know, I graduated in my year I was supposed to graduate.
Were your parents strict? Were they loose? Like, what kind of a household did you grow up in when you were coming up in Clearwater, Florida?
My parents were great. My dad coached Little League Baseball for my brothers and myself. He did it for 17 years. He did it even past when we were in there. So he coached for my older brother and then my middle brother and then myself. And I played, you know, since I was T-ball at 6 all the way up through, you know, before you go to, I guess it would be like a farm league or something like before high school. I played, you know, about 14 years old. About 8 or 9 years in baseball. Played a little bit of pee-wee football, not too much, but I raced bicycles, BMX, tracks, you know, jumps and berms and stuff like that.
Was that like your main sport you think that you were most passionate about as a kid, was BMX?
Baseball and BMX, definitely. I ran track in middle school, played a little volleyball in middle school as well. So I was definitely a sports nut.
Were you dreaming as a little kid about being a professional athlete? Was that something that even came into the picture for you? What were you thinking about when you were growing up?
Not really. I didn't really have a picture of what my older self life looked like at that point. You know, I knew I wanted to do something that wasn't behind a desk, per se.
Early on?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm more of an outdoors kind of guy. I like to be outdoors. I like to ball golf and fish and things like that. I like being outdoors.
Well, you had mentioned previously that you played baseball, you did BMX, but you also found the game of golf really early on.
Yeah, my dad had me swinging young when I was 6 or 7 years old, and never really took it seriously, you know, until right before high school, and that's when I started to get a little more serious about it and play more often and try to get better. You know, up to that point, it was just swing the club, have fun, make the ball go, you know, things like that. And my dad, you know, ingrained the good things about golf, the things that, you know, kind of translate over to life skills and things. And golf is very transitory when it comes to that. You know, be respectful and honest, and don't cheat, and do everything correctly. You know, and have etiquette for your fellow Pedal Man and things like that.
I think just golf in general for young kids is such a good game. It forces you to fail just over and over again, you know, and I feel like, of course, and for a young kid, I think it's an incredible life skill to have. I guess I want to move forward a little bit. You get into high school, you get into golf. Was the world starting to open up for you for the game of golf? Were you starting to think, maybe I could take this to the next level? Were you passionate about the game at that point?
No, because I was more like a 4th or 5th string guy on my golf team. There was dudes that were way better than me back then, and I knew I was never going to be that good at ball golf. I broke par a few times in my life, you know, but I never really gave it that much effort like I did disc golf.
So then you finish high school. What are you wanting to do? Did you get a job right away? What were you thinking at that point?
I worked many different jobs right out of high school. Even in high school, I had jobs. I worked at a Sbarro pizzeria in the mall when I was in high school, you know, before I was probably 15, 16 years old when I first got that job. Worked there for a couple years. And then when I got out of high school, I did a myriad of different jobs. I worked for a pool company, putting in the plumbing pipes before they pour the pool and stuff. And did a little carpet installing with a friend of mine, and then I got into construction. I framed houses, and I did that for 10 to 12 years after I did those other few small jobs here and there, 6 months here, 6 months there. I did 10 or 12 years of framing houses, and that got me, like, it was like going to the gym and getting paid for it. I got really strong doing that, and that was kind of the same time as I was starting my disc golf journey.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you found disc golf. You had played golf already, and you said it was getting a little expensive to just go to the range after you played in high school. But did you throw frisbee before that? Were you getting into that freestyle or anything
Whammo,
like that?
you know, the black 165s, and me and my buddies would try and push. You know, you stand there, I stand here, you trying to push each other back. You know, and so you can throw it farther, and that was kind of the game back then. Not too much freestyle or anything way back then. It was just, you know, throw it and push each other back and have fun with it, you know, catch it, you know, make sure you catch it. We'd try and, you know, see how many catches we could get in a row and things like that. Just fun stuff. And we actually did this at Cliff Stevens Park before there was a disc golf course put in. Really? We would, I had some buddies that lived in that neighborhood, and we would go down there, and there was a light in the parking lot. We could play till the wee hours of the morning with this parking lot light and just throw in frisbee, catch frisbee before it was ever a disc golf course there. So I threw probably thousands of frisbee shots in Cliff Stevens Park before there was ever a disc golf course there.
So you guys were not just casually playing frisbee. That's a lot of shots to throw. So you were starting to love this even before you were playing golf.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's no future in just playing catch back and forth. I mean, there were people back then that were doing some stuff with freestyle, but you said you didn't do anything like that.
I really didn't know about freestyle.
Exactly.
And, you know, we do little things we could, you know, kind of catch them to your leg, little things, but not with the spinning and the body rolls and all that stuff, the teeth grinds.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about when you found disc golf itself, and talk about what it felt like when you first started to get into it.
Well, my brother had mentioned to me that there was a disc golf course that went into the park. He knew I had, you know, hung out at that park because my buddies lived up in that neighborhood, which was like 3 miles from my house. It wasn't too far away, but it wasn't right next door. You know, all my buddies lived up in that neighborhood, so they lived right near that park. So I'd go over there and we'd play around. But what was the question again?
Well, I was just asking about how you found disc golf.
Oh yeah, my brother told me there was a disc golf course there, and I kind of went and looked around and didn't really see anything that looked like. I didn't know what disc golf was. I didn't know what things looked like, and found out that it was just wooden posts at that point. There was no baskets in the park. It was a wooden post with a red area about this big painted at the top of the post. And then there was a small wooden post about this tall as the tee with a little number on it. And it might have looked like an exercise. You know how they have those little exercises? Yeah. It might have looked like that to me. I didn't really see anything the first time that he told me that. I walked around, I was like, I didn't see anything out there. I don't know what you're talking about. But the next time I went, there was people out there actually throwing, and I watched where they went, I watched what they did, and I was like, oh, okay, that's it. And there was no baskets at my home course for 8 months to a year when I first started playing. I started on wooden posts, and there was always an issue with, did you hit high enough on the post, right? Because there's a line, a red line, and it was hard to tell. So we ended up wrapping the post in carpet. So when you hit the post in the carpet, it would be soft. And if you hit below the carpet, thwack, it would make a huge noise. So you knew if you were good or not, right? And that's how we started to get the right height, you know, and know if you were good or not.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like envisioning a world where that is the basket that we play on. It's wonderful that Ed Hedrick thought of the basket concept, but when you were playing this wooden pole course, were there more things that you were noticing that you wish you could change about the course and make it better other than just putting carpet on the wooden post?
Well, I knew about the baskets after I'd played a little while, in a couple of months. I knew that there was baskets because there was, you know, discs with pictures of baskets on them back then and stuff. And I was like, that's what a basket looks like, but I had never seen one. And I guess the city finally, you know, got enough money in their budget to put them in, and we only had 9 holes at first. So the baskets went in on the front 9, and then we took the wooden carpet posts and put them in on made a back 9 back here. So we had 9 baskets and 9 posts still. And then it was a little while, you know, 6-8 months after that, we finally got baskets on the back 9.
Were you starting to get competitive with it? Were you starting to maybe run some leagues or start some tournaments? Or what were you looking at back then competitively with disc golf?
There wasn't a whole lot going on competitively back then. I could barely find a disc. I started out with an Innova Coupe. And there was one guy who would order discs from a guy named Rick Neal in Oklahoma. It's called Disc Flights was his business. And he would have a box of discs, and he would come to the park, and everybody knew his car, and if he was out there and he opened his trunk and he had a box of discs, if you weren't standing in his trunk, you didn't get a disc because they were gone instantly. So I played with the same Innova Coupe for probably about 4 months when I first started. 1 disc, didn't lose it, 4 months, played with it.
What was it like? What was the Innova Coupe? I think there's a lot of Innova throwers that are watching this that probably don't even know what that thing is. So what did it fly like, essentially?
It's a little skinnier than an AVR and very rounded similarly. It doesn't have a bead, a little thinner, but very AVR-like, just not quite as beefy, I think. A little less stable.
What was he selling out of his trunk? What did you get to look through when you were there?
The XD. Innova XD was the big disc at that point in time. It was the AVR XD. It wasn't just called the XD, it was called the AVR Extra Distance. It was just a little sharper, a little more aerodynamic than an AVR. And you know, they obviously flew, you know, 30, 40 feet farther than the AVR. So it was the disc to have back when I started.
When did you start seeking out competition for disc golf? When did you start thinking, okay, I want to test my skills against some other people? Where did you even look to find that?
Probably after I met C.R. Willie. He was an ultimate player. He played for the University of South Florida, I believe, and some other local teams, Sarasota something or other, and he had a nickname for himself, Claw Nail Jackson, because he would hang on to that disc when he'd get his hands near it. It would stick. And he had a lot of Frisbee experience, you know, because he was ultimate player, and I guess he had played some disc golf elsewhere, and he was the big catalyst of kind of getting things going competitively in that area. And I also want to mention Alan Ross, who designed the course at Cliff Stevens Park. He moved from Tennessee, came down to Clearwater, was living there, and he got the course put in there. And before I ever knew about disc golf, so I really want to thank him for putting that course there, because I might have never found the sport of disc golf when I did, or even at all, if he didn't do those efforts and put that in.
Wow.
At that point. So
then with C.R. Willie, how did he know where the tournaments were? Was he just running them and advertising?
He was a little
all
more in
around
the
town?
Frisbee scene, you know, because he played ultimate tournaments, and you know, ultimate tournaments. There was people that played disc golf, so there was a little more advertisement going through that circle rather than just out at a park, you know, random park. So it was kind of through him where I got the bug to compete, and I had gotten pretty good pretty quickly. You know, like I said, I'd thrown Whammos and stuff like that for a long time, so I was already throwing 270, 300 with this coupe. You know, that first few throws, once I got the hang of it, because it didn't fly like a Frisbee. You know, I throw a Frisbee like this, and I threw the coupe like this, and
exactly.
You know, it took you know, a week or so before I got a hang of that thing. But yeah, it was a big learning curve. But once it happened, you know, it started happening quickly after that. And then I put in a lot of hours, like a lot of time. If I wasn't working and I wasn't sleeping, I was playing disc golf.
And so you're playing with this coupe or the XD or whatever you had. You're not going to go to a field and just practice, right? Because then you have to chase it down and throw it back and chase it down. You're just repping rounds at your local course. Is that what you're pretty much doing?
Or me and my buddies would go to fields sometimes, and we'd, you know, like I said, we'd push each other with a disc instead of a Frisbee. We'd do it with this, and you know, that way we'd get to throw farther. I'm pushing you back this time. No, I'm pushing you back this time. No, you're going to run. And you know, that's how we kind of got each other to throw farther. and be accurate, because we don't want to make them run hard left or right. You know, we're just trying to throw it right over your guy's head, make them go, ooh.
That's brilliant. Doing field work with just another person and just pretty much playing long toss, essentially.
Yeah, long toss, yeah.
How did you learn technique? Just self-taught?
I guess. I mean, I'm watching the other people that were around at the point in time. A guy named Bob Blair. I don't know if anybody might have ever heard of this guy, but he could throw when the sharp edge rock came out, and a couple years after I started playing, he was throwing this over 400 feet, and it's like a loud snap came out of his hand when he released this disc, and that was like, wow, like he was really bombing it.
So were you asking him about tips, or were you just mimicking what you saw from other people?
More mimicking and, doing the motions and stuff like that, just watching, taking it all in, soaking it in.
Huh. Well, the question I have, now it's easy to go online, sign up for a tournament, no problem. You know where all the tournaments are, what the dates are. Back then, I know the IFA had a newsletter that said where some tournaments were happening, but, when you picked up disc golf, where did people see the tournament dates, and where did you know where to sign up and all those logistics?
A little thing called Disc Golfer magazine. It was a kind of a paper pamphlet, like 8x11 paper pamphlet, and it might have been 20, 30 pages long at the most. And that was kind of our go-to, where had all the tournament listings and things like that. And there wasn't a whole lot of tournaments back then, so it didn't take up pages and pages and pages like the tournament listings do now.
Of course.
What is it, 300 some tournaments in a weekend? It's amazing.
Dizzying.
It really is.
To say the least. I know your first year playing tournaments, it looked like 1987. It looked like you joined the PDGA. Were you playing tournaments before that without a PDGA membership?
My first encounter with disc golf and the wooden post was in May of 1987.
Oh, yes. So then you played tournaments right away then?
I played tournaments probably 5 months. The first tournament was probably 5 months after I actually found the sport.
When did you get hooked? What tournament hooked you on
the first one?
Why?
I don't know. I just really liked the camaraderie. It was a really good group of people, and most of the people were older than me, and they were willing to help and give tips, and it was just a really fun family of people back then, and it was very close-knit and tight, and that's kind of where you learned about other events and things too, is the other people would tell you, oh, we got this coming up, book this, and maybe make sure you save the date and stuff like that, or they'd have a little flyer, a one-page flyer, and they'd hand them out. And that was a lot of how we would find out about other events too. Besides the Disc Golfer magazine thing, it was just paper flyers.
Word of mouth.
Or paper flyers. They'd bring, stack of 40 or 50 of them to the tournament and hand them out to everybody who wanted them.
That is fascinating to me. When did you first start traveling out of state to start playing tournaments?
My first out-of-state tournament was in Laurel Springs, North Carolina, at the Boylan Family Farms Christmas tree farm. It was just amazing. It was like actual golf. It was par 4s and 5s and ups and downs and a Florida flatboy. It was just like mesmerizing. Like, wow, look at this. This is crazy. Cool. Like you're throwing off of a big drop off, and then, it goes way down and comes back up, and then the basket's on the other side, and there's a big X cut with Christmas trees everywhere except for in that X. And that was like their maintenance roads coming in and out of the place, and that was hole 1. I was just blown away, and I think that really got me like really wanting to seek more stuff.
Of course. Well, I saw pretty quickly, I think it was 1989, you played your very first World Championship, right, and you got 5th place.
I got an invitation in '88 and just wasn't quite into it enough at that point and didn't think we were ready to go to the World. I was, kind of scared, World Championships, I don't know. But we did get an invite, and me and CR did get an invite, but neither of us went, and we got another invite the next year, and we're like, we're going. That was another year into it, and more local tournaments played, and by this time we were like, okay, I think we're ready to go.
Talk to me about that trip. Were you excited? Were you nervous? Like, what were you feeling?
A lot of weird, cool things happened that trip. We took my Ford EXP and drove it up there, and CR Willie got the worst case of poison ivy. I mean, arms, legs, it was everywhere. He was just calamine lotion boy by the end of the week. He just pink man. I lost my wallet on one of the courses somewhere, never to be found again. Just a lot of stuff happened that week. Levon Wolf stepped up and loaned me some money, to make it through the week, and there was just a lot of good things happen. I met a guy from Arizona and his partner that we played doubles, because doubles was before the actual singles tournament, and they looked at our PDGA numbers on our disc. They're like, oh, we're gonna wax these guys. They're brand new. Their numbers are 4,000 something. They're like 2,000, 3,000 numbers, And me and CR came out and started like 15 down or something on the first round at the World Championship doubles. We're leading the tournament. We go to the other course, and then there was like 2 pools. They were at one course, we were at the other. We switched. We went to the other course, and we didn't play as good, but it was a tougher course. I think we shot 8 or 9 under, something like that. We ended up tied for first place, and with John Earhart and Steve Valencia. And so we had to travel from our course back to the course we had just played, where they were waiting. We walk up to the first tee to get started in the playoff, and John Earhart looks at me and CR and goes, "Who the hell are you guys?"
Oh my God.
Had never heard of it, didn't know. You know, at the World Championships, you got a doubles team. You might think you've heard of these people before if they're challenging and tied for the lead after 2 rounds of doubles. And I was like, we're the kids from Florida that came to kick some butt. Looked them straight in the face, and we won in a 2-hole playoff.
How did you feel? Were you guys celebrating afterwards,
Oh,
or
man,
did you feel like there was a big
big
tournament coming up?
super, and it was beyond my wildest dreams that we could even be in the top 10 of this doubles thing. You know, we didn't have much, you know, tournament experience, especially world tournament experience with people from everywhere. We had done a few out-of-staters at that point, but not many, most just local Florida stuff.
Well, you're playing against Steve Valencia and John Earhart in the doubles, which obviously before the tournament. When you watched them play the game, they were pretty top dogs at the time, right?
Yeah. John had just won the '88 Worlds, and Steve Valencia was a wonder kid. I mean, he could throw lefty and righty, and just amazing talent.
Were you sizing yourself up against them like at the time? Or were you thinking like, these guys are good, but they have some holes in the armor? Like, were you starting to believe in yourself when you were playing against them?
I knew if we could shoot the same scores on the, you know, the 2 rounds that, yeah, we were physically there. It's just, I think it was more of a mental thing past that where we were mentally strong enough to do this, and we won the playoff, and it kind of really boosted our egos a little bit. Like, I think, you know, it made our mental game a little stronger than it could have been had we lost the playoff. And it was an interesting thing in the playoff too, because they had been sitting there practicing the couple of holes that we were starting on, you know, 1, 2, and 3. So the first hole was it was like hardly anybody was getting any kind of deuce look at it. So, you know, a couple of threes, move on, go to the next hole. And this was, you know, 280, 290 across a ditch with some weeping willows framing each side of the ditch. And I absolutely parked my drive. And they didn't have very good drives. And Steve Valencia was going up to putt, and he had marked his disc, and I noticed it was a red rock. And I was like, "Didn't you throw a purple disc off the tee?" And I looked over where I thought his drive was, and I said, "Isn't this your drive you threw off the tee right here?" And way farther away from the basket than when they were trying to putt. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, you're right. This one I must have lost this one in practice and left it laying there." So it was like almost trying to cheat on us right then and there. And me and CR had to step up and say, "Look, you threw purple disc, not a red disc." Because John immediately shanked his into the first tree or something. There was no way, you know, it was going to be John's. And Steve was 70 feet away from the basket with the purple disc, and 34 feet away with the red disc, with the like little slope going up. And both of them were short of the slope, but the one was way
oh my gosh.
short of the slope.
Was it kind of nerve-wracking to have to say something to him at the time?
Not really, because I knew he had thrown a purple disc. I'm all about honesty and stuff. Like, you threw purple, you didn't throw red. This is the one you threw over here.
Wow. Well, you take down the victory in doubles, and you go into your very first singles world title.
Well, World Championship run, anyway.
Well, of course, yeah. How did you feel going into round 1?
I felt, you know, like I could compete. I had played, you know, enough with some of the people around, and played a couple rounds of doubles with a few of the players, and played a playoff with those guys, and I knew, you know, I probably had a chance, because my scores were getting better before I, you know, ever went to the Worlds, and I knew there was definitely a chance, and I played really good the whole week. I was 1 stroke out of the lead going into the final day, and had a lackluster second to last round, which put me 5 or 6, 7 strokes back of the lead going into the final round, which didn't really have a chance at that point, because Steve Weiskup, he just played really good the last day. But it was a great learning curve, you know. I knew I could be there. I knew I was in close enough to do it, you know. And being within 1 stroke after 8 rounds, you kind of know you're there.
So you go home, you get 5th place at your first World Championships. You just won the doubles. Is a career in disc golf even a thing? Were people talking about that at the time? How many road warriors were really trying to do it back then?
You know, I can't give you an exact number of road warriors, but there was, you know, very few. It was less than 20, I'd say, that were, you know, making their way around the country and doing stuff. Glenn Whitlock comes to mind. He was definitely one of the earlier ones, Hosfeld and a few others that would take long trips and go play. But no, there wasn't a career. Yeah, there was no thought of career. I was, you know, I was building houses and I got some time off. My boss was awesome. He said, if you're not here, you're not getting paid. Let me know when you're leaving.
So this is still borderline hobby, but a hobby you take very seriously when you got off the '89 World Championship.
Passionate hobby. It was. I was passionate about just doing it and being as best as I could at it. But it definitely no thoughts of any kind of there was money, but there wasn't really much money in it back in the day and stuff. But had no plans of making it a career.
Well, I wanted to ask that, you know, it sounded like there were some guys, like you said, that were trying to make it at least their full-time living, or at least lifestyle.
Lifestyle.
How did they do it? Just talk to me, like, at least from your outside perspective, meeting these people, how did some of these guys get around the country during a time when there really wasn't a lot of prize money or pretty much no sponsorships?
Right. I mean, I to this day don't know how, you know, a lot of them would do it, but I would think, you know, selling merchandise and things, hacky sacks, frisbees, things like that. I really don't know. There was, you know, some vending going on, but that's about it. I didn't see many other, you know, avenues of income.
Mm-hmm. Didn't seem very appealing to you, it sounds like.
Well, it was appealing to play, but I really haven't really been ever a salesman. I don't like to sell things. It never really appealed to me throughout, even to this day. I'm just not a salesman. I don't like to sell things.
Sounds like you like to win, because next year in 1990, something special happened and you did get the victory for the first time. And I want to talk about that 90 season pretty much entirely, because it looked like to me that was the year you started to pop off a little bit.
That was the first year I actually traveled, you know, extensively and went out of state a bunch of times. It was my first foray into the West Coast. CR had a girlfriend that he was hanging out with, and she was from California. She was hanging out in Florida for months and months on end, and she was heading back to California, and he didn't go. I hit her up. I was like, you're driving back to California? Can I snag a ride with you maybe? And if you would stop at this tournament in Texas, I'd be more than grateful to you for the rest of the trip, and I'll buy your hotel rooms all the way out there or something like that. And she's like, sure, yes, let's do this. And we stopped in Athens, Texas, I believe, and played the Pinnacle, something or other. Pinnacle was a John Houck event. Didn't do so well. I think I got 13th place or something like that. Then we made our way out to La Mirada, and that was like eye-opener. Like, wow, this place is awesome. Sam Farrens, Randy Amon, and Steve Valencia. It's like kind of their home track area out there. And I think I ended up 4th in that tournament, which was respectable at that point in time, and especially on their home course.
Of course. Can you paint a picture of La Mirada back then? Because I think it's still an iconic course today, but I'm sure back then it was like beyond iconic.
Yeah, I don't think the back 9, where there's like 27 holes, I don't think that the extra 9 existed. I think it was just like the front 18 at that point. But man, it was beautifully manicured and sloping and palm trees. And we're from Florida. It's fairly flat, you know, and most of the courses that were on fairly flat pieces of ground in Florida. And La Mirada was just this beautiful, undulating, awesome track with perfectly manicured grass, and just the whole Frisbee culture out there was a lot bigger than it was where I was from. So it kind of opened my eyes to, you know, how many people were doing it, how many people were loving it, and how many people were actually playing tournaments, because this tournament, you know, was full. I mean, back where I was from, we had 30, 40 people at a tournament. You were going, yeah, all right, 40 people. This was hundreds of people. I was like, wow, it's really going on. It's popping off out here.
So currently, a lot of players are growing up and they can start watching instructional videos instantly. The moment they start getting hooked on disc golf, YouTube is just easily accessible. But for you, when you're coming up, sounds like you kind of have to just travel and go meet people to learn more about the sport of disc golf. Can you talk about going West Coast, meeting all these guys, talking with them more? What were you picking up about the sport, maybe for your own game?
You know, I think it was more so for technique style, is how to just go through it. you know, not just stop, because, you know, back in, you know, Frisbee, you kind of like stop when you're playing beach Frisbee, and just to get your body all the way through it and rotate that leg around and get in front with the back leg and stuff like that. And I think that's more what I learned from those guys than anything, was just the amount of power you can get through with your body, and not just your arm or your hip. You know, it's your whole body, legs, hips, shoulders, back, elbow, arm, all that. And then the follow through, you know, getting all the way through it. And I think that's where I first learned was from the West Coast guys, because they were ripping it. Sam Farron's threw a Phoenix. I don't know if you've ever seen a Phoenix, 623 feet.
Really?
We had the distance record, 190 meters with a Phoenix.
When you look at some of these old distance records, it's pretty astounding. I mean, yes, you got Wiggins throwing 1,100, which is insane. But I look back to guys throwing Whammo 40 molds or like arrows or things like that, and they can throw them 440 or something like that. How truly impressive was that to see such slow discs being thrown that way, and how were they throwing them?
Well, it was kind of a different skill, I think. You know, being able to throw a disc with this much hyzer and predicting how much, you know, it's going to turn and fade before it, you know, can level out and not turn all the way over and just drag into the ground. And I think that's, you know, it's a different skill that kind of has been lost, I think, a little bit with all these newer discs and then overstability and things like that. People talk about hyzer flip, you know, and nowadays it's like a 10-degree hyzer flip, you know, to a 10-degree flip. And back in the day, it was like an 80-degree hyzer to a slow-moving flip, you know, and then you get over about 15, 20 degrees and glide out. But yeah, throwing a lid over 400 feet was just mind-boggling. I could never throw a lid that far.
I have told these records to modern players, and they laugh and say that there's no way that it can be done. They're blowing it out of proportion. What was the single most impressive throw that you can at least remember, maybe aside from the Phoenix, which was a little bit wider rim disc, correct? Yeah. I'm talking slow lid type disc. Do you remember guys that were throwing them well over 400?
A guy named Michael Cansey from Australia threw a Lightning P38 612 feet, and that's the record that Sam Farron's broke with the Phoenix. 612 with a Lightning P38.
In what setting?
I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't see the throw, but I know it happened, and it was a whiff diff world record at that point.
Did you have any guys that were of the old school class throwing these, you know, slower discs super far that kind of took you under their wing, or guys that you looked up to in regards to how they threw the disc?
And I think early on, I think it was, you know, one of my more local guys. He was from Orlando. Greg Hosfeld was someone I tried to emulate in their form and style, and he had won the '87 World Championships, so it was kind of someone to look after. And Dave Greenwell was a very big influence on me, because he came down to the Triple Crown in, I think, 1988, and he was the first kind of out-of-state pro that I'd ever met and seen. He was, you know, all in the same kind of suit. He had it all. Everything was matching, and these star sunglasses on, and yeah, he was kind of the first, like, whoa, this guy's like, he looks like a pro, he acts like a pro, and he throws like a pro, you know. And he opened my eyes to just being a little more professional and whatnot out there.
Well, you got your first world title in 1990, and it sounds like it was kind of a barn burner. A lot of drama, a lot of scoring changes. Can you bring me and the viewers into that tournament? Because there's really not a lot of coverage of it that we can watch and soak in.
We played Vista del Camino, which they play nowadays. It was a different layout, obviously, and we played Fountain Hills, which is a different layout back then, but we did play on those two courses, and we played a couple other courses. I think one was called Kleinman Park, and another one was Riverview Park. I think those were the four main courses. And, I don't remember a whole lot about the whole week, but I do remember a lot about the final day, you know, because that's when it all came to fruition. And there was 3 different leaders and 9 lead changes in the last 18 holes. It was it was intense, to say the least. And Crazy John Brooks was part of that. A guy named Sam Grzaffi. I'm sure a lot of you guys never heard of that name, don't even know who the guy is. I think he was 18 years old when that happened. This guy could throw an AVR over 400 feet easily. he didn't mess with the other discs. He just threw AVR every hole. He just bombed AVRs. This guy was amazing. And I'm not sure who the other final 9, or I was actually final 18 back then. We played 10 rounds of 18. So it was a final 18 back in those days. And I just remember it being nip and tuck between crazy Sammy Joe and myself. And I think I had a one-stroke lead going into the 17th hole. And I had just, forged a one-stroke lead at that point. And there was this hole that no one was getting anywhere close to. It was 460. It was out there. And I just threw this Cobra of my life. Just smashed it like this, turned it, and it just did the best turnover, flip, hyzer back, and it skipped up about 8 feet from the basket. I hadn't been within 70 feet of this hole the whole week playing it, and I was parked. And the rest of them, they kind of threw it 60, 70 feet away like we'd been doing all week, and I went up there and tapped it in. It was 2 strokes up with 1 hole to go. And the last hole was fairly open 300-footer with water behind it. So I just made sure I was short of the water, slid my disc under the basket so I didn't hit off the basket and roll in the water or something like that. And just tapped it in for the 1-stroke lead because Sammy Joe parked it to get within 1. It was so much adrenaline running me through me at that point. I think that's where that extra distance come. I just had the adrenaline and just knowing if I could throw a really good one here, I might just lock it up on that 17th hole. And a lot of people remember that shot, and still to this day, people that were at that tournament are just like, man, that shot you threw on 17, it was just incredible, amazing, wow.
I'm kind of blown away because 460 with a Cobra just doesn't make sense, really, to me. What was it? A brilliant wind read? Was it just pure speed out of your hand? Like, talk more about that.
Those things, I would say, because to get a Cobra to go a long way, you've got to throw it with a lot of hyzer, but it can't be too nose up. But it's got to be high enough to turn over and come back. If it's too low, it's going to turn in mid dig. If it's too high, it's going to fall out early. And it was just a combination of all that adrenaline, good wind read, great rip, and the wind cooperated with me at that point. And I just couldn't believe that it was 8 feet away when I walked up there. I was expecting to be 20, 25 feet away after I saw it. Kept walking. I was like, oh my gosh, it's a tap in.
Would you say it's one of the best shots of your career?
Definitely.
Wow. Well, I want to ask, you win your first world championship. What were sponsorships like back then? Were they a thing? Were players getting sponsored by the manufacturers? Like, what did that look like for you? When did that first come into the picture?
There was some talk of sponsorship at that tournament, but it was by Jim Kenner from Discraft. He came up to me with the brand new Eclipse. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those things. He said, try this. We were up on this deck by a restaurant that was near the course. He's like, just rip this out into the course somewhere from the upper deck. And I ripped it out there, and it flew pretty good and everything. But I was kind of more of an Innova guy already at that point. I grew up throwing Innova, and it was almost my 3rd year of playing. So I was kind of more of an Innova person. I did have some other discs in my bag, but I ran through them and didn't like them as much as the Innova stuff. I threw some Lightning, had some F-15 Eagles, some X-15s, some P-38s, and had a couple of Eclipses and things like dabbled in them before I got sponsored. And, what else was there? There was the Discraft. Oh yeah, the Phantom was a good little short-range disc and things like that. But I was more partial to Innova without ever having talked to the Innova guys or anything like that. And I told Jim Kenner, I was like, I kind of prefer Innova right now. Didn't have any offers from Innova or anything coming in, so there was nothing keeping me throwing Innova. I just was like, I just prefer the Innova disc right now.
Was he coming to you with a full lineup of discs? Like, what did the sponsorship look like that he offered you? Was it just equipment,
He didn't really
money?
offer me a full, he didn't give me the details. He just said, how would you like being sponsored by Discraft, basically, and didn't elaborate at all on that. And I kind of shut him down a little bit. I was more partial to Innova at that point.
So then at what point did you start talking to Innova? What point in your career did that become a reality?
I think after the 91 Worlds when I won the 2nd time in a row, and they kind of approached me after that, and I think I was wearing the Innova badge on the 92 Worlds.
Mm-hmm. So what did that look like? What did that initial deal look like? Were you nervous about doing it? Did you start to think of maybe a career being a bigger option for you?
Still no at that point. It was more hobby oriented and stuff like that. Now, sure, I was winning a little bit of money here and there, but not enough to make you go, whoo, I don't have to work, anything like that. But it was basically just discs and apparel to start with. That's all they were offering anybody back then. just discs and apparel, and I was happy with that at that point. I don't have to buy more discs, you know. I got cool shirts to wear and things like that, some hats. That was okay with me back then.
Did it change the way that you practiced, actually getting some backups to start throwing?
Yeah, you know, I wasn't afraid to lose a disc because, like I said, it was hard to find discs back in the day. There wasn't stores you could go to and get them. There was just a person that would come to the course, and you know, if you weren't there, you weren't getting one. So.
Well, I want to talk, you know, we could go through every single line item year, and that would probably take us a while because it was quite a stretch, but you had some seasons, I believe I looked at 94, 95, 96, when you were starting to win nearly every tournament that you stepped up to. How did you approach the sport at that time, and was it different in like 90, 91 when you were just winning your first titles?
Yeah, I think it was, you know, fairly the same. I think there was a few more players getting into it by the time 94, 95, 96 rolled around for sure, but there was still the core, you know, hardcore guys that were there every year in the Worlds and the big tournaments, and a lot of names that people don't, you know, really know about these days. The Lissaman brothers and Randy Amon and people like that. And it's so hard to remember everybody from back in the day, but yeah, there was just a lot of people that just kind of spurred me on to be better. Just, you know, I gotta stay ahead of the Joneses. You know, I gotta stay ahead of these guys. And you mentioned 95. Like 95 was by far my best year. I think I played 26 events, placed first in 23 of them, and got second in the other 3. Lost in a playoff, lost by 1 stroke, and I think I lost by 4 strokes in the other one. I almost won everything that year. I was 7 strokes or something like that from winning every tournament.
It's hard to even, you know, ask you a question. I mean, how does it feel to just win that much? Do you start to feel a target on your back?
Oh, for sure.
Knowing that people are coming just to want to beat you? Like, what did that start to look like? Did you start to have galleries following you? Like, what was that?
Only in the bigger events, I'd say there was, you know, some galleries, or if the local club had a lot of enthusiasts, you know, there might be some galleries out for that. But generally, just the World Championships would have some galleries. Most of the other tournaments, not so much. Maybe, you know, 5, 6, 10 guys maybe out there watching the lead group or something like that. But by 95, yeah, I had a big target on my back. I had won 5 World Championships in a row before 1995, 90, 91, 92, 94. Yeah, I had 5 in a row at that point. So yes, all the West Coast boys were like, how is this guy just doing it every time? It's, golf isn't that kind of game where you can just dominate and win. You know, I was like, winning by 2, 3, 1, 4 strokes, whatever it is. That's not a lot in a 10-round tournament, and that's very small. And I don't know, you know, why someone shined on me to pull out every one of those, you know, more important wins, the World Championships and things like that. But I just had a deep hunger within inside myself to just get the job done.
Talk about the psychology of having a target on your back. I know we've had a few players after you kind of have their periods of reign, and we're kind of seeing it right now with Kristen Tatar in the FPO division. What is it like, and did you enjoy it?
I really enjoyed it, because I knew if I played my best against the course, I didn't play people, I played the course. That was my whole mindset, is I want to beat the course. I don't care what you're doing. I can't control what you're doing. I can't control what you're not doing. I can control what I'm doing. And I wanted to beat the course. And if I beat the course the way I knew I could beat the course, then I felt I could win. And that was my whole mindset, was beat the course the best you can. And I played conservatively a lot of times, you know. There was holes that were dangerous and stuff. I would just take a par. I wouldn't go after it. I was a golfer. My dad had me golfing young, and I knew the value of strokes, you know. Pars don't kill you. Bogeys and doubles do.
I talked to you know, a good friend of yours and one of your arch rivals, you know, throughout your career, Barry Schultz, and I kind of asked him about, you know, what he thought of you as a golfer and your play style and whatnot. And he told me that from his perspective, he thought that you were never #1 in any category, but he felt like you were almost #1 in every category. How do you feel about that assessment from Barry? And then do you disagree with him and maybe think that you were the best at something?
I think that's a spot-on assessment, and I would say that about myself. I didn't throw the farthest. I wasn't the best putter. I think I might have been the most accurate, if anything. You know, I could put a disc where I wanted to put a disc, and I had a good golf mindset, and I knew when to play safe. I knew when to go for it. I think it just was a big circle of, you know, talents that's what you need that to become, you know, a great golfer is you need to be good at every aspect, but you don't have to be the greatest at every aspect. You don't have to be the farthest. I mean, John Daly hit the farthest back in the day, and he won a couple big tournaments, but he wasn't, the greatest golfer ever. And I think that just the whole rounded package, I think Barry hit it on the head. I wasn't the greatest in any one category, but I think I was the best collectively at all categories.
Can you fill in some of those gaps for me, though? I'd love to know who you thought, and maybe this goes along with the theme of you doing color commentary this week. Can you fill in some of those gaps and say who you thought maybe were #1 at some of these categories?
I mean, I've always thought the Lissamans were some of the best putters ever, and Jeff and Johnny Lissamans, they would just knock the chains down every time from 40, 50, 60 feet. Those guys could putt the lights out of it. And obviously Scott Stokely was the farthest throwing guy. I mean, he had the distance on lock. He could throw probably a sidearm with an X-clone farther than I could throw backhand.
Really?
Yeah.
That far?
Yeah. Scott Stokely was an amazing talent, like distance-wise. Like he could just blow you away with some of the shots he threw. And these were, speed 5 and 6 discs.
What about the sidearm? What about this is a rare category in the 90s. It seemed like there weren't a lot of players.
I think I was in last place in the sidearm category.
Totally fine. Yeah, maybe that's the one you're lower on the list on. But yeah, talk about that shot in the 90s and maybe who the best throwers of the sidearm were.
There wasn't many people throwing sidearm because the discs were so understable. They didn't handle the torque, and sidearm has a lot of torque on it. And Scott Stokely, once again, was probably the best long sidearm thrower. There was other, shorter sidearm throwers that might have been as good as him accuracy-wise, but for pure on long distance with a sidearm, Scott Stokely was hands down the best, heads and shoulders above everybody else.
Like by far?
By far.
I do want to ask you about that because that fascinates me, why so many people were not throwing sidearm. I mean, yes, the discs were flippy. I totally understand that. I was looking at the PDGA approved discs and when they came out, and I saw that the Viper came out in 1991.
Late 91.
And it seemed like when I look back, that was like one of the first like true overstable discs out there. Can you talk about when that disc came out, what kind of chatter there was around it? Did people like it initially, or was it kind of seen as a novelty?
I got a good story for that. I was playing in my hometown tournament, Cliff Stevens Park. Steve Slazer shows up, and he's the only person in the whole tournament that's got a Viper, and he had already learned how to throw it, right? And it was a little windy that week, and it was the first disc you could actually throw into a wind with some ante, and it would fight back out of it. There was no other disc that would do that at that point. It wouldn't happen. You threw a disc with ante into the ante, it was rolling. All the other discs were rolling. So he had a little advantage going into that week because no one had ever used it. No one even had one. There wasn't another one on the site to get. He was the only one that had it, and he ended up winning that tournament. And I got me a Viper the next week, able to mess around with it. And I threw it like 4 or 5 times. I was like, this thing sucks, because I was throwing it with hyzer like I was throwing all the other discs, and it would just go way left. And finally, someone said, why don't you try a roller with it? Ripped what I thought was a roller angle, and it goes, flies out long ways. Actually flew, instead of rolled. And I was like, oh, that's how you throw them. Snap over on them hard, trying to pull them into the ground with the nose down, and they'd fight and go. And Steve already had that. Steve Slazer was an amazing talent back in the day. I mean, he had every shot in the bag, every trick shot, he had it all. So he kind of opened my eyes by beating me at my home course with a Viper, and what that disc could do.
Did it go right in your bag afterwards?
After I learned it, yeah, for sure. But it didn't take, took me a couple weeks to finally, after I did the one, tried to roll it and it flew, I was like, oh, okay.
It's such a counterintuitive technique. I mean, you come, like you said, having to throw so much hyzer on everything, and even popping nose angle up too to have to stabilize the disc. To this thing,
you had to pop the nose angle down and pull it down. Like you had to really pull down it. A little pull down on the stable disc. You really had to pull down on this thing because it was slow. Speed 6 or 7, I believe. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but
how quick were players molding their play style off of discs like that? Were there any players that just used that as their stock disc?
I mean, you kind of had to have the other disc to do the other things, but yes, that disc really just launched the ability to throw far into the wind, which you didn't have before with the understable disc. It was just, you just had to read it as best you could and make it go out there as best you could. I would actually disc down. I would go to a rock when it was a headwind. sharp edge rock. I wouldn't throw the Cobra into headwinds because it was a little too flippy and the rock would hold better.
Well, I guess that goes back to my point. Viper comes out in '91. I think the Whippet came out in '92. We had some overstable discs in the market. Was it still just too early for players to want to start trying them on some forehands, or did you have some players that were starting to work?
I think that disc, was the disc that got people throwing more sidearms, definitely farther and harder. And once you beat up a Viper, it wasn't as overstable because it was DX plastic. It would beat up quicker, and it wasn't this new stuff that takes years to even make a difference in how it flies back then. A couple weeks hitting trees and scraping off roots and hitting rocks and things, the disc would change quickly. So a beat-up Viper then became, you could throw it relatively flat and just flat and hard, and it would turn a little bit and go. So that was when I think people really started throwing the sidearms more because it was a little more neutral at that point.
But then you look at the world champions, of that time. Even you went from '90 to '98, I believe, and then the people who went after you. You're not seeing still a ton of sidearm, players. Is that just because the best players at the time weren't doing it, so then the players that wanted to win just didn't try for it?
I can't really answer that question. I think there was a lot of people that came from the game of Ultimate, which the sidearm was a big part of Ultimate, and those are flippy discs, but it just didn't seem to work for distance back in the day. And I still think the backhand's going to go farther than the sidearm no matter what. So I think that's why the backhand was more predominant, just because it was a better distance. I think it's a little easier to throw a disc straight backhand than it is sidearm, like down a tunnel or something like that. It's a little harder to make a sidearm work, I think, just down straight tunnels. Now, with today's disc, you can throw it down a straight tunnel and make it skip to the right, or depending on which handed you are, and that really works. But I only ever threw sidearms if I absolutely had to. It's not like I didn't have one. I had one. I just only threw it when I absolutely had to. Only if I was like in the bushes and had to reach out, and that's the only shot there was. And I'm pretty good at sidearm rollers, getting out of trouble, making them weave through stuff. 250, 300-foot sidearm rollers and things like that. But as far as just like tee shots with the sidearm, just never was my cup of tea.
From 1990 to '98, your world title run, how many sidearms did you ever throw off the tee?
As little as I possibly could. Probably in that whole stretch of all the tournaments, not just the Worlds, 10 off a tee.
How did they go? How were they?
Not great, not horrible. Just because the hole was short and maybe went around to the right a little bit, and you just throw it low with a Viper or something like that and get some skip, and just nothing else was going to work unless you tried to throw some tiny little backhand roller, which those can be a bit tricky. I was more of a roller guy. If it went to the right, if it was low ceiling and went to the right, I was rolling it most of the time. I didn't need a sidearm.
I've heard stories from many guys that have played against you that they think in the roller category that you stand potentially on top. Do you agree? Do you feel like that was a shot that you threw almost better than
if any of the categories that I was going to be on top of, that would probably be the one that I would be at the top of or near the top of categories. I could throw an AVR roller, a certain distance and make it turn in there. A rock roller a little farther, Stingray Cobra rollers a little farther, a little different action on them. I really loved rolling the disc. It's just a fun way to make, especially with low ceilings and right turns at the end. It just fit, it seemed to work.
How many variables did you think about when you were lining up rollers in tense moments? I feel like there's so many things that can go wrong when you lay a roller down. What is like your mental checklist when you line one up?
I think just the practice rounds, just seeing what they do in the practice rounds and adjusting accordingly for the conditions, whatever the wind's doing, if the grass is wet, things like that. But it was more practice rounds. How'd you make it work in the practice round? If you made them work good, you kind of replicate that. And obviously a little bit of wind and that kind of reading things too, but just love rolling disc.
Were there any wind conditions that were no-nos for you for rollers, or were you comfortable throwing them in any?
Yeah, I didn't like throwing them into a headwind. Hard left to right cross, didn't like throwing them in that either. Hard the other way across, they would blow the bottom out. So it was generally more tailwind or cross tailwind things where I would want to throw the rollers. Or if it was a short hole, if it was hard to the right short. Didn't matter what the wind was doing, that's if it was going anyway.
I want to zoom back into this title run. You'd mentioned in the past that it took 7 titles for Innova to finally give you a signature disc, because at the time it wasn't even a thought of thing for anybody.
Nobody, yeah.
Was that ever something that you planted in their mind? Were you scheming this idea, or did they come to you with that idea?
They came to me with that idea, and I was more than accepting and willing and grateful that they would offer something like that, for sure.
What was the process like? I mean, you got KC Plastic came out, you got your own version of the Rock, your own version of the AVR. I mean, you had your name on so many different discs. What was that like for you? Was it enjoyable? Was it an exciting process?
It was a bit overwhelming, to tell you the truth. You know, I was like, wow, there's like hundreds of thousands of these things all over the world, and people are throwing them, my names on it. It was kind of a bit overwhelming to think about it like in that aspect, that wow, my name is everywhere now, and because it's on these discs. And there was discs that people probably never heard of. The KC Pegasus. You ever heard of a Pegasus?
I wish I had one. No.
Never even heard of a Pegasus, probably, have you?
What was it like?
They existed before the KC Plastic came out. It was like almost like a Firebird, little miniature Firebird, little smaller edge, but very Firebird-like, very overstable for the time frame that it came out. And then the KC Pegasus came out and wasn't as overstable as like the DX Pegasus, so it was actually a little more user-friendly. There was a Raven. I don't know if you ever heard of those. KC Raven. I'm sure you've heard of a Gazelle, the KC Gazelle, and that was, I think, one of my first real favorite neutral flying discs, where you didn't have to overdo it, you didn't have to underdo it, you just kind of threw it out there fairly straight, and it would do its thing.
Well, real quick, you're surprising me with your reaction to this whole process of getting the big sponsorship being overwhelming, because I hear stories from everybody about how confident you're on the course, how cutthroat you are when you're playing tournaments, and to hear you say, whoa, this is kind of a lot for me, is surprising. Can you talk about the feeling? You know, was it weird being like famous in this little community?
I don't say weird, it just, I can't even really put it to words. It's just not natural. It just didn't feel natural to me that it was, you know, it's like, I didn't feel like I did that much of anything to be rewarded with this type of thing. And it was, they were selling like hotcakes in the beginning. Like, I was amazed at, like, they'd give me the numbers per month, and then I'd get the check, and they'd tell me how many. It was like, really? That many sold in 1 month? Like, wow. And they're going to Japan, and they're going to Australia, and they're going to, you know, all these different parts of the world. And I was just like, man, that's amazing. It really is.
It almost feels like a little imposter syndrome. You're like, whoa, I don't feel like I deserve this, you know? Did it ever mess with you while you were playing? Or when you were on the course, were you kind of locked and loaded and it didn't matter?
I think I was more locked and loaded and it didn't matter. And a lot of other top players were using those discs because they were, you know, they were their best discs out at the point. And the plastic would last longer, it wouldn't beat up as quickly, and so a lot of people were using them, and that made me feel good, you know.
Well, for multiple reasons. You mentioned the paychecks coming in was kind of a big deal, and was that ever a point when you started to think maybe you didn't have to do your job back in Florida? I'm going to keep pushing on this because I'm fascinated.
That was about the point, you know. I kept working a few years after the deal came through, and I started to be enough to where I didn't have to work, and I was kind of risking injury by working, because building houses it's not easy work. You're out there, saws and nail guns and ladders, and just lots of stuff can go wrong. Walking on 4-inch, 3.5-inch walls, 20 feet in the air, and things like that. Was one little slip up, and there goes the disc golf.
So then you said 3-4 years. Was there ever a time when you were full on, no job, disc golf was your main career? That
was, yeah, probably about 4 or 5 years after the KC line came out. Just went full steam,
How was it?
It was great. It was kind of where I was working towards once I, got to the point where I was thinking, man, I can maybe make this, my full-time thing. And then I, put my nose to the grindstone and tried to make it that. And that's what became of it, I believe.
How different did the game feel to you? Like, now that you have all this free time, you get to spend it all on disc golf. What did you do with that time?
Well, it wasn't so much free time because I had a child in 1994, my son Keegan, who's now 29. His wife, or my ex-wife, his mom wanted to split apart. She couldn't handle me being gone all the time because I'm constantly traveling throughout the world. And I don't know if that was the full truth, but after that point, it was a year and a half after he was born, so that was mid '95 that was going on, a divorce, and I became a non-residential parent, which means I was a visitation parent. That means I got him every other weekend. So I could only play 2 tournaments in a month, and I had to be home for him because I got him on every other weekend. And she would work with me. You know, if I wanted to be gone for 2 weekends, I'd come back and get him for 2 weekends. And that's why my tournament number, total tournament number, isn't as large as it could be, because I was a dad first at that point. I fully committed to being a dad when I could be a dad, you know, every other weekend. And I didn't play tournaments when he was around. You know, I spent time with him. And that was a huge factor in my amount of play and things like that.
So with that, it sounds like you have a lot, you know, going on in the personal life while you're going to all these big tournaments. Is the disc golf course kind of your escape from everything going on in the rest of the world?
That was 1995, and that was my escape, and that's kind of, I think, why I had such a great year, because it was an outlet. You know, I didn't have to deal with the divorce, and I didn't get to see my son for 40 or 50 days when it first happened, and I was just crying my eyes out at night, and, you know, I didn't have my son, and it was heartbreaking in the beginning. But, you know, that pain fades over time, and, you know, life changes, and it got easier, and I got more in a groove of, you know, going out, coming back, going out, coming back. So I never stayed on tour. I never played more than 2 or 3 tournaments in a row. I've never been on a road more than 3 weeks in my whole career.
And there were so many guys that felt like year after year that were starting to do it more full time. You start to hear of the journeymen that are starting to, you know, scrap across the country.
I never did that. It was never for me, because I had to come back. Yeah. I had to be a father, and that was more important than anything to me.
Do you feel like coming back home was a benefit to you, being able to rest and relax and kind of get you ready instead of playing 40 to 50 tournaments a year?
In the long range scheme of things, yes, for sure. It was sanctity, it was solace, it was home. And I got to rest, I got to recharge my batteries, and it worked out. It worked out. It was almost like a godsend that it happened that way, because I never really wanted to be a road warrior. I don't like living out of a suitcase. I like solid foundation, you know. I like home base.
Of course. I want to go past the world title run in 98, you know, 90 to 98. 99, you lose to Ron Russell.
Which
first
I
loss.
Played probably one of my best world championships ever that year. I beat 3rd place by 11 and 4th by 17, which was Barry Schultz and Scott Stokely.
Talk about that week. I mean, that's incredible for you to claim that and say you were playing so well.
Dude, from that point on, the last 5 or 6 rounds of the tournament, he didn't miss a putt from 70 feet and in. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it, but it was like just like a switch flipped, and I'm telling you, there was putts that he putted around silos that you couldn't even see the basket 80 feet. Ching! Putts up over ridges with bushes on top of the ridge. You can't see the basket. Ching! From 70. Like every putt from everywhere. It was the best putting I've ever seen anybody do for 5 straight rounds ever.
You need a unique putt too.
It was. I mean, there was hyzer putts. There was anti putt. There was everything. It wasn't just putts. It was turns and curves and blind and up and down and just amazing. I wish there was video of the last 5 rounds of that tournament so everybody in the world could see the best putting display ever for 5 rounds.
Really? What do you do at that point?
Tip your cap. That's what I did at the end. I bowed to him at the end of the turn. I was like, man, hats off, dude. You killed it. You beat me by 4 strokes in the end.
I guess that's pretty much the only way you want to lose, you know, somebody having the week of their life and giving you some entertainment towards the end, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, all that rigmarole didn't affect me at all. I still played my game. I was still, you know, I was still me out there. I didn't miss putts because he mind messed me. It didn't happen that way. He just was unconscious with the putting those 5 rounds. I'll never forget it.
After that tournament, you didn't have too many consecutive, you know, big finishes. I mean, you know, we had Cam Todd come in 2001. Barry came in. It was kind of spotty with the World Championships. Is that attributed to, you know, the field just getting stronger and you having to work harder to win those major titles? than ever before. What was that period of time like
Yeah,
for you?
and of my son getting older as well. Wanting more time with dad, because when he's a toddler, he gets his time, and that's what he gets. When he gets older, he wants to do more things with dad. 5, 6, 7, 8 years old at this point. I think I had a lot to do with it, and I think I myself was getting a little burnt out. I've been traveling for 10, 12 years now doing it, and there's a lot of different factors that went into it, but it wasn't for not the want. I still wanted it every time I went on. I just don't think I practiced as hard or played as much or wanted it as much at that point. But I still did, but I didn't physically do as much as I used to. Yeah. I didn't putt as much in my house or around my yard. 400, 500, 600 putts a day is what I used to putt a lot of times, just because I knew I needed to keep it fresh. And I think that's a lot of the factoring is, and there was, like you said, the fields were getting tougher, the people were getting better, and there's more people that could do it well, and nowadays it's like just that times 10, out there these days.
Well, yeah, and I think you and I would, obviously a lot of players, but Barry Schultz specifically kind of became your arch rival for a decent chunk of time. And again, I talked to Barry earlier in the week, and he had great things to say about you and good memories to share. And I'd love to hear from your perspective. When he came on the scene and he started to play well, he started to beat you. What did that feel like to have a player as good as him kind of coming in the mix?
Well, he and Ron Russell were kind of both in that same mix at that point, because they were both making runs at me and beating me, nipping me here and there. And I actually enjoyed it, I enjoyed it. I liked competition. I liked nip and tuck. I liked one-stroke, two-stroke things. Winning by 10 wasn't as fun.
Not a battle.
It wasn't as fun. I liked the competition. I'm glad that there was people finally stepping up and getting in my face and nipping me here and beat me by 4 there and beat me 5 here. I enjoyed it. I'm not the person that wants to win every tournament, but I want to beat in the mix every tournament at least. That was kind of where I sat with it all. As long as I'm in the mix, I'm happy with it.
Barry told me that he thinks you and him were the 2 best rock throwers, or in the mix for best rock throwers of all time. Would you agree with that? And then what were your styles like throwing rocks? How did he throw the disc differently than you?
Yeah, I think he was probably a little bit better with like an overstable type rock shot, and I was a little bit better with an understable rock type shot.
Beat up rock.
Yeah, roller rock, hyzer flip rock, things like that. That's I think where we just slightly differed, but both excelled.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree with him? Do you think you and him were top 2 of all time? Or?
At that certain point in time, yes. Mm-hmm. Because Ron Russell threw discraft.
Yeah, he was a comet thrower, wasn't he?
And his comet game was right there with our rock game. Like 1, 2, 3, no problem.
What were those courses like? I mean, we hear the pros now say, I barely get to throw mid-range these days. What were the courses like that allowed you to throw the mid-ranges? How long were they? What was a long course considered back then?
I think the courses were definitely shorter, in general, but it seemed like they were tighter. We had to shred tight lines and make the disc turn at certain spots, like get it to fly out 200 and then break a little to the right, or get it to fly out 250 and then get it to break left. It was just the little subtle nuances of the holes back then were, there wasn't a whole lot of discs that would take off and skip, like today's disc. Like you get some huge flares and you can count on it. Back in the day, you couldn't count on a good flare skip because the edges of the disc just weren't quite wide enough and streamlined enough to make the disc flare. So you had to work them through the air most of the time. And I think that's definitely the difference, I think, in the old school courses is just tighter lines and a little bit more nuances and where you have to make the disc break and things like that.
If you were given a gig to design like a modern World Championship course, are those elements that you would try to incorporate in the design?
A few holes for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what makes a good short hole is one that has challenge to hit a line and then challenge to land the disc near the hole correctly so it doesn't scoot away. And a perfect example of that is like hole, I'm not exactly sure the number, but it's at Nevin Disc Golf Course over here. I don't know if you ever played Nevin. Yeah. It's a very short hole. It's got a tight window. And then it goes a little to the left And then if you right after the basket, it shoots down about 40 feet. That is a quintessential short disc golf hole. You can take a 4, you can take a 2, you can take a 1, you can take a 5. Anything can happen on that hole.
Oh, I sat behind the hole last year, and I watched the best players in the world struggle to find an option off the tee on that one, which is, to me, fascinating.
That's more what the old school disc golf game was like. I think, you know, there was more holes like that were tricky.
Mm-hmm. How do we make disc golf hard for the pros now? What, in course design, what are elements that you like and maybe want to see more of, and what do you maybe not like, how the courses have kind of evolved?
I think the OB is getting a bit restrictive, a little too close to the basket, a little too much of it throughout the whole course. You know, every once in a while you can let the guy rip it out there and not have to worry about going out of bounds if he's 12 feet left of where he should be. And that's, you know, not all the time, every hole, you know, it's like, I don't know, I watched the Open at Austin or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
This
on the golf course.
And it was just every hole with double OB lines all the way around the back.
Oh, it might have been Texas State's in Houston, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the USDGC, it's kind of the one tournament a year. I think it's okay to do it here because this is, you know, the top test. It's the test. But every tournament, everywhere, I don't see it being as viable as they're making it out to be these days. And what can you do but restrict more and bring pretty soon they're going to be throwing it 6-foot circles around the basket or your OB. I mean, when does it stop?
I hope it stops. I hope we find that, you know, I feel like right now we're in that phase of course design where we're kind of pushing the envelope, and I hope at some point we find that beautiful happy medium, and I hope we see players from your generation coming to design some of these tracks, or at least give some consultation to maybe challenge the players now, maybe some new ways.
I got a great way to challenge players is instead of hitting hallways this way, make them hit hallways this way, high and low. And you'll see people struggle with that. When you've got to get over a hump, but under limbs.
That's nose angle control.
You don't always see a bunch of people parking those holes. You see some trouble. You see someone hit low, you see someone hit high. That's the kind of thing I think we can do to challenge the players these days, with still giving them the same amount of airspace, just a different style of gap. Not this way, but this way.
Have you designed quite a few courses? You've had some gigs, correct?
Yeah, I've got a few under my belt. Less than 10, but more than 5.
Do you enjoy the process?
Yeah, I love designing courses. It's fun. I love coming to an open piece of canvas land. You know, you can just do what you want with it. I've put a gold overlay at my home course. We didn't touch anything in the original course. We just overlaid a gold course. So the original course still exists, but you can also play the gold. You can play a mixture of original and gold. There's just a plethora of options out there. I think that's the way to go. If you're going to try and stretch a course that exists out, don't ruin the original layout. Let it be. Just overlay it. Stan McDaniel is a great example of doing that. Hornet's Nest, things like that, where the course existed, and then he went and put a gold overlay over top of it, and you can play the original, you can play the gold, you can play whatever you want. There's many options out there. I think options is the name of the game when it comes to course design. I don't like to see just a huge long course that's got no short tees, no short pins, and it's only the best people can play it, or else anybody else plays gets tortured out there. You know, I don't think that's wrong. Unless it's private property, then you can do what you want. But if you're on a public piece of land, you know, make options for different skill levels.
Well, I'd love to ask you, and you might not have an answer for this because you've seen so many, but I've seen you've played the Japan Open so many times, you've played in Europe, you've won in all of these areas. Out of all these countries and continents that you've played, is there a single course that sticks out to you as your hands down favorite that you've ever played?
Outside the United States?
Doesn't matter to me, anywhere, all over the globe.
Wow, I've just played so many, it's tough to pick just one.
What about overseas?
You know, I really can't just pick one course. I'd say one of my favorite courses going overseas was probably Yarva Disc Golf Park. I really enjoyed that place. It had a lot of cool topography and trees and OBs, and it wasn't too much of this or too much of that. It was just a good mix. They had 3 9-holes, so you could play this 2 as an 18, or these 2 as an 18, or those 2 as an 18. And it was just a lot of options, and I like options. You know, I think that's good for disc golf. And going back to what you said, how we can make it harder. When I first started playing, there was single chain baskets with trays that were about this deep. And you'd hit a putt perfectly, and it would go down into the tray, and it would scoop around the back and flop out. So there was a certain amount of touch you needed to have to make the putt. And you couldn't just rip it in there. It would blow, chains would blow apart, it would hit the pole and come back at you, or it would scoop around and go out. So that's kind of why I developed my putt. It was a little bit softer, you know, not quite as hard in there, up to down, so it's going down into the basket, and better off, it's going to have a better chance of catching it if it's going down in the basket. Nowadays, the baskets are this deep, the disc doesn't scoop out the back, there's 48 chains in it, you know, and you can slam them in there and it catches it. So I think that may be where the game can take a hint from the past and add a little more touch into the game, because in ball golf, you have to have touch around the hole.
Perfect speed,
you know, stuff like that, and either a smaller basket or whatever. I think something basket related could be where the game could become tougher.
Well, it's fascinating because, as we've gotten baskets that have caught better, the style of putting has completely changed. We see spin putters more often in younger players than we see pitch putters or push putters these days.
And when you miss an upshot by 28 feet, it doesn't cost you as much. It seems like back in the day it did, because you get more spit outs, you get more good putts that didn't go in. Nowadays, if you throw a pretty good putt, it's going to catch it. I'm seeing a lot of putts that look like they're going to miss, and somehow the basket sucks it in. Like, wow, back in the day, that would never have went in with these 14 chain skinny trade baskets. There's no chance unless it was absolutely perfect.
Well, it's fascinating. You look at the players now, and you know, I believe the leader in Circle 2 putting is 42%. I think Gannon Burr is at 41 or 42% from Circle 2, and it seems like the courses, because the baskets are catching so well, are forcing you to Circle 2 more than they're forcing you to Circle 1. And they're really molding around the baskets being the way that they are. You know, you're about to call some color commentary this week. What about these new players and the way they've developed around how the courses are and how the baskets are? What is impressing you about the modern game?
I mean, the distance, obviously. These guys are just throwing the lights out of the disc. 600 feet on command, 550-foot, you know, golf shots, not just distance shots. And that to me is really impressive. You know, obviously the discs have gotten faster and better, but you know, it's just to make them be controlled at that distance is really tough. And as far as going back to the Circle 2 thing, I think that stat's a bit misleading, because you can have a guy that's 6 inches outside Circle 1 all day long, and he's 75% from Circle 2, and he didn't putt as good as a guy that was 20 feet from Circle 1 and made a bunch of those putts. That guy putted way better. If he's making 60 footers all day, and this guy's making 32-foot, 11-inch putts. So that stat can be a bit misleading, because you can be a few inches outside Circle 1, and it's kind of like a Circle 1 putt.
You almost want like an average distance, you know, per putt from Circle 2 or something like that.
Right, and even the U disc will show 5 feet, 16 feet, 27 feet, 38 feet. They don't go exactly to the foot. It's a 9-foot gap every putt, and I think that's a bit misleading as well.
True, definitely true.
Let's go with a 5-foot increment. Why 9?
It's probably the middle point, maybe between the two sections. I'm not entirely sure.
I don't understand the 9 feet.
Well, I wanna ask you, you know, as we kind of wrap this thing up, you know, you're about to call color commentary. There's a lot of people that are very excited for you to call the shots this week. Are you proud of where the game is? Are you happy with where disc golf is right now? Are you proud to see where it is right now?
I mean, I'm overjoyed to see that players are getting big contracts and the game is exploding. I mean, Finland went from, 20 courses, I don't know how many years, 10 years ago, to now it has 800 courses. Like, things like that are just make my heart melt. I love that. The game is finally getting more mainstream and taking off. And you ask someone about, you know, disc golf. Oh, I've heard of that, you know. Back in the day, what is that? Disco golf? What are you talking about? You dance and play golf? Like, seriously, no idea back in the day. Nowadays, you know, it's kind of on everybody's tongue. You know, people have heard about it. People are talking about it. There's more and more courses, so many people are more exposed to it. It's being played, you know, in more places, and certain cities are meccas now. Like Charlotte is a mecca. Minneapolis, Minnesota, definite mecca. You know, I'm sure there's a couple over in Finland that are meccas. I call them meccas. Something that has 50 courses or more within an hour drive of downtown. And there's, not many places like that, but there are. Kansas City comes to mind, and that's really cool just to see the explosion of the sport, especially since COVID. I don't know what COVID did, but it made people, get out and want to play and get outdoors, and it had a profound impact on this sport. And I know the manufacturers are seeing the difference since COVID, because it's hard to keep the shelf stocked and stuff since then, and it's been a real boom for disc golf.
Ken, I got to say thank you for sitting down and talking to me, man. I was thoroughly entertained the entire time. I got to shake your hand, my friend. Thank you so much.